The desert night was silent, too silent. Jonah Mercer felt it first, the vibration of hooves through the dry earth. Inside the lonely ranch house, 6 women froze around the wooden table, their faces lit by a single oil lamp. Then a creak. The back door shuddered as someone tried the handle. A young voice hissed through the dark, trembling, "They're coming, and they won't leave anyone alive." Jonah's heart pounded. He had spent his life drifting, running from losses he never stopped counting. Now in this remote valley, he faced a choice that would change everything. Walk away and survive alone, or stand with the only family he'd ever find. When that door opened, the West would decide who lived and who became another ghost in the dust. The wind carried the taste of dust and regret across the endless prairie. Jonah Mercer trudged forward, each step heavier than the last, his boots leaving shallow prints in the dry earth. The sun pressed down on his back like a hammer, and the sky above him was a merciless, empty blue. He had been walking for days with only a canteen that now swung empty against his hip. His stomach had long stopped growling, choosing instead to twist in slow, painful knots. Jonah had lost count of how many miles he'd covered. He only knew he had been moving west, away from the life he once had and the ghosts that clung to him. He had not always been a drifter. Once there had been a family, a farm, and a sense of belonging. His father, Samuel Mercer, had been a surveyor, a quiet man with steady hands and a talent for reading the land. Jonah had learned to measure fields and study maps at his father's side. It was Samuel who gave him his first leather vest at 18 and his father's pocket watch, a symbol of pride and responsibility. But pride could not save a man from disease. One bitter winter, Samuel felt a lung fever, leaving Jonah and his mother to scrape through the snow-choked months alone. His mother, Eliza, had never been strong after that. She tried to hold on, to keep the small farm alive, but her heart seemed to break a little more each day without her husband. One spring morning, she simply didn't wake up. Jonah buried her under the oak tree by the creek, the same place where his parents used to sit at sunset. He had one sister, Anna, but she had left years before, marrying a preacher and moving to St. Louis. She had written once, sending a photograph of her in a neat dress, smiling beside her husband. The letter ended with words Jonah would never forget. "I hope you find your place in the world, brother." But Jonah hadn't found it. Instead, grief curdled into restlessness. The farm fell into disrepair. When a traveling card game came through the nearby town, Jonah saw it as a chance to change his fortune. He had always been careful, his father's lessons in numbers and observation making him sharp at the table. But in the gambling towns of the 1870s, luck was never just about the cards. Places like Silver Bluff and Deadwood were filled with broken men chasing one last chance. Some were veterans of the war who couldn't go home. Others were farmers ruined by drought or railroad expansion. Most were dreamers who believed one hand of cards could erase years of loss. Jonah thought he was different. He thought he could win. The night he lost everything, the saloon stank of whiskey and sweat, the air heavy with cigar smoke. He didn't notice the subtle nods between the other players, the way the dealer favored certain hands. By sunrise, he was walking out into the dirt street with empty pockets. His horse, his money, and his father's pocket watch, all gone. Even his pride had begun to fray. For the next 3 days, Jonah wandered through the desert scrub, the horizon stretching endlessly in all directions. Hunger gnawed at him, and thirst burned his throat raw. He thought of turning back, of giving up entirely, of lying down under the sun and letting the earth take him. And then he saw it. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a house where no house should be, its shape shimmering in the heat waves. He blinked, expecting it to vanish like the false lakes he'd seen on the horizon before. But it stayed, a large wooden house tucked between 2 low hills, a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. Jonah's pace quickened, his legs trembling. The closer he got, the stranger it seemed. 6 women sat on the wide front porch, their dresses simple but neat, their posture calm. They didn't recoil in fear or suspicion, the way townsfolk often did when a drifter came too close. Instead, they watched him with quiet, measuring eyes as if they had been waiting. The eldest rose slowly, her dark hair streaked with silver, her presence commanding without a single harsh word. "You look like you could use some water, stranger," she said. Jonah's lips cracked as he tried to speak. Yes, ma'am. I'd be grateful. Behind her, the other women exchanged glances, some subtle language he couldn't understand. A tall, thin woman with white streaked hair disappeared into the house, and a moment later, cool water touched his lips. It was the sweetest thing he had ever tasted. The eldest woman introduced herself as Eleanor Hayes. The others followed: Ruth, Clara, Naomi, Lila, and Abigail. We're sisters of a sort, Eleanor said with a mysterious smile. Jonah noticed they shared no resemblance, but something bound them together, something stronger than blood. When's the last time you had a proper meal? Naomi asked. Jonah's stomach answered with a loud growl, and the women chuckled softly. As he climbed the steps onto the porch, the wooden boards creaked beneath his boots. He had the strange, unshakable feeling that he was crossing an invisible line, leaving behind the life of a lonely drifter and stepping into a story he didn't yet understand. Inside, the air smelled of warm bread and roasted meat. For the first time in months, Jonah felt the edge of safety, like a man who had been lost at sea finally spotting a light on the shore. He didn't know it yet, but this house, and the women who lived in it, would change the course of his life forever. Jonah lowered himself into the chair, and when the first bite of warm bread and tender meat touched his tongue, he realized just how hollow he had become. He ate in silence, savoring every mouthful, while the women watched with quiet curiosity. Jonah hesitated only for a moment before eating, his hands shaking as he lifted the first bite to his mouth. He hadn't realized how hollow he'd become until the first mouthful of real food touched his tongue. He ate in silence at first, the women quietly watching him. Their eyes didn't feel judgmental, only curious, searching, as if measuring who he really was. He wiped his mouth with the cloth napkin they had provided, and the simple act of holding a clean napkin in his hand felt foreign, almost unreal. You've been traveling alone a long time, Clara said softly. She was the auburn-haired one with green eyes sharp as glass. Her voice was calm, but Jonah could feel her gaze cataloging every detail about him. I have, he admitted. Naomi, the dark-skinned woman with a honeyed voice, leaned forward slightly. And before that, you had a family. The question hit harder than any blow. Jonah set down his fork slowly. I did, once, but life had other ideas. He told them in halting words about the fever that took his father, the grief that carried his mother soon after, and the sister who moved east and never looked back. The women exchanged those mysterious glances again, something between them that Jonah couldn't read. Pity wasn't in their eyes, only a kind of understanding, like they'd heard this song before. Then Naomi spoke again, her voice quiet but full of memory. I know that hunger, not just in your stomach, but the one that lives in your chest. Jonah looked up, and she met his eyes. I came here barefoot, she said, 4 years ago. I'd been working in a saloon in Abilene. One night, a man raised his hand to me, and I ran. I didn't stop running until I saw this porch. Eleanor gave me water before I could even ask. Jonah swallowed hard. He didn't know what to say. This house, Eleanor said, her tone carrying the weight of truth, is for people who have nowhere else to go. People the world has chewed up and spit out. Everyone here has a story like yours, Jonah Mercer. Different roads, but the same ending. Her words sank into him like water into dry earth. He hadn't realized how starved for kindness he had been, not just for food or drink, but for the feeling that someone saw him. Not as a drifter, not as a problem, but as a person. Lila, the youngest, smiled shyly at him across the table. You look better already, she said, and for a moment Jonah almost laughed. As the last crumbs of bread disappeared from his plate, he leaned back in his chair, exhaustion pressing down like a weight he could finally let himself feel. His mind swirled with questions about the women, the house, the strange way they looked at him. But he didn't ask. Not yet. For the first time in months, Jonah felt the faint spark of safety. He didn't know it, but that meal marked the end of one life and the quiet beginning of another. The fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting soft, flickering light across the wooden walls. Jonah Mercer leaned back in his chair, his belly full for the first time in weeks, but unease coiled low in his stomach. The 6 women were no longer speaking. They simply watched him, the room thick with a kind of expectant silence. Finally, Eleanor Hayes folded her hands and said, "Jonah, there's something you need to see." Abigail, the tall and pale-haired woman, disappeared into the back room and returned carrying an old leather-bound book. Its cover was cracked and darkened with age, and its edges were soft from decades of handling. She set it gently on the table in front of him. Jonah hesitated. "What's this?" "Our history," Eleanor said. "And your future." Abigail opened the book with care, the yellowed pages whispering as they turned. On one of the middle pages, written in faded brown ink, was a name that stopped Jonah's breath. Jonah Mercer. He blinked, his pulse quickening. Below his name were the details of his life. Born 1841, Cedar Bluff. Parents, Samuel and Eliza Mercer. Sister, Anna, married to a preacher in St. Louis. Lost family farm and fortune in spring of 1871 after card game in Silver Bluff. Will arrive alone wearing a blue shirt and leather vest, carrying nothing but pride and desperation. Jonah's hands trembled as he traced the words. Everything was right. The family names, the poker game, the vest his father had given him. Even the shame that clung to him felt written between the lines. He looked up sharply. How could you know this? Who wrote this?" "Miriam Whitmore," Ruth said softly. "She was Eleanor's grandmother. She built this house and left it to us. She had a gift." Jonah frowned. "A gift?" "She saw the threads that connect people," Eleanor explained, her dark eyes fixed on him. "Not just what they were, but what they were meant to become. Miriam called it the sight. She used it to find those the world had forgotten, lost souls, and bring them here." Jonah sat in stunned silence. He'd heard plenty of strange tales in saloons and on the trail. Ghost stories, visions, omens, but nothing like this. "You're telling me she saw me coming? Years before I was even born?" Clara nodded. "Miriam kept records of everyone who would pass through this house. Names, descriptions, sometimes the very clothes they'd be wearing." Jonah looked down at himself. Faded blue shirt, dusty leather vest, and shivered. Lila, the youngest, leaned forward. "She didn't just write about you, Jonah. She wrote why you'd come." Eleanor gently flipped to the next page. A map of the valley spread across the yellowed paper, marked with red X and handwritten notes. Land parcels, river bends, mining claims, all neatly cataloged. "My father taught me surveying," Jonah murmured, recognition sparking in his mind. "These are property lines." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Exactly. Miriam knew that one day a man would arrive with the skills to finish what she started." Jonah leaned closer to study the map. He realized that every X formed a pattern, circling the valley like a protective ring. "She was buying up land," he said slowly. "Strategically." Naomi nodded. "She used her inheritance to buy dozens of parcels under different names, but she passed before she could complete her plan." "What plan?" Jonah asked, his voice low. "To protect this place," Eleanor said, "and to make it a refuge for those like you, for anyone who had nowhere left to go. But there's more." She turned the page again, revealing a list of names. Jonah saw 6 familiar ones: Eleanor, Ruth, Clara, Naomi, Lila, and Abigail. And under them, his own, Jonah Mercer, the last name on the list. His mouth went dry. "She saw you as the final piece," Abigail said, "the one who could give us a future." Jonah shook his head slowly. "I'm just a man who lost everything. Why would I be the answer to anyone's plan?" Eleanor reached across the table, her hand warm against his cold fingers. "Because Miriam believed that the most broken souls can build the strongest homes. And you have a choice now. Keep drifting, or take your place among people who already believe in you." For a long moment, Jonah said nothing. He felt the old ache of loneliness rise in his chest, but something else stirred beneath it. Possibility. Then Clara spoke, her voice quiet as a prayer. "You aren't the first to come through that door, Jonah. Years ago, a man named Samuel Pike arrived the same way. Starving, half dead. Miriam gave him shelter. He rebuilt his life here. And one day he saved a child in a flood because he was here. Because he stayed. A ripple of kindness that reached further than he ever imagined." Jonah looked again at his name on the faded page, and for the first time since he lost his family, he felt the weight of destiny pressing against him. Whether he believed in prophecy or not, this place, these women, felt like the last open door he might ever find. The last glow of daylight bled out across the valley as the wind shifted, carrying a distant echo of hooves. Jonah Mercer stiffened where he sat by the window. The women noticed too. A single, unspoken tension gripped the room. Eleanor Hayes set her teacup down with deliberate calm. "He knows," she said. "Silas Kane," Ruth muttered, her hands tightening around the edge of the table. "I told you he wouldn't wait long." Jonah had heard the name whispered earlier in the evening, a shadow behind every word of Miriam Whitmore's plan. Now he wanted the truth. "Who is Silas Kane to you?" Clara exchanged a grim glance with Eleanor before answering. "He's Robert Whitmore's stepson, Miriam's husband's boy from his first marriage. When Robert died, Silas inherited the original homestead, but he didn't know Miriam had been buying up land in secret." Naomi leaned forward, voice low and sharp. "He's a man who believes the world belongs to him, and he's killed to make sure it stays that way." Jonah's brows furrowed. "Killed?" "Robert Whitmore didn't die in any hunting accident," Eleanor said. Her tone was steady, but Jonah could hear the old anger beneath it. "Miriam always believed Silas had a hand in it, paid a man to pull the trigger, then made it look like a spooked horse in a bad fall." Jonah's chest tightened. He'd met men like Silas in the frontier towns. Greedy, ruthless, protected by fear and the law's blind spots. But here, with these 6 women staring at him, the threat felt personal. Then came the rap at the back door. The room fell silent. Jonah instinctively reached for the rusty rifle propped against the wall, though his hands shook. Eleanor motioned for him to hold his ground as she moved to unlatch the door. It wasn't Silas Kane, but a young man, maybe 17, with mud on his boots and fear in his eyes. He held a rifle, but the barrel wavered. "Don't shoot," he stammered. "My name's Owen Pike, Mr. Kane. He sent me to warn you. Or to scare you. I don't know anymore." "Warn us?" Abigail asked, her pale hair catching the lamplight. Owen swallowed hard. "He knows about the stranger. He knows you've been waiting for someone. He says if you don't hand over whatever your grandmother left behind, he'll take this place by force." His voice cracked. "He's got 6 men riding with him now. Says he'll bring more if he has to." Jonah stepped forward. "Then why are you here, boy?" Owen's hands trembled. "Because I got a sister. She's 12. Sick all the time. Silas promised me money for medicine if I rode with him. But he also said no one in this house would live if you didn't give in. His voice broke. "I don't want to be part of killing women." Naomi rose and disappeared into a side room. When she returned, she carried a small leather pouch and pressed it into Owen's shaking hands. "There's enough here for medicine, food, and a roof for a year. You take care of your sister, you hear?" Owen blinked. "Why would you help me?" "Because that's what this house is for," Naomi said softly. The boy's throat worked as he nodded. Then I'll help you. Silas plans to hit at dawn in 2 days, but he'll send scouts before. If you want to stop him, you'll need a plan." Jonah looked around at the women, a strange resolve settling over him. He had drifted across the frontier for years with no direction. Now, for the first time, he felt the pull of a cause that mattered. "What kind of plan?" he asked. Eleanor tapped the old map. "You remember what Miriam planned, Jonah. Her land circles Silas's like a noose. We have the deeds and the law. Now we just need to act before he does." Jonah studied the map, his father's lessons in surveying coming back to him. "I can help you finish what she started," he said, resolve hardening in his voice. Jonah met her gaze, the first spark of belonging lighting in his chest. "Then let's finish what she started." The valley held its breath. Before dawn, a silver mist curled low over the dry grass, and the sky was a pale wash of blue and gray. Jonah Mercer crouched near the barn, listening to the distant thunder of hooves. Beside him, Eleanor Hayes adjusted the rifle in her hands with the calm precision of a woman who had been waiting 20 years for this moment. "They're coming," she said. From the tree line, dark figures emerged. Silas Kane and his hired men, 7 riders in total, their silhouettes cut through the mist like wolves on the hunt. Silas rode in front, his broad frame wrapped in a dark coat. his hat pulled low over a face that carried decades of entitlement and malice. "Remember the plan," Jonah whispered to the women. His heart pounded, but his voice was steady. "We make him reveal himself before the law arrives." The riders slowed as they reached the porch. Silas dismounted first, his boots sinking into the soft dirt. He surveyed the house with a predator's patience. "Eleanor Hayes," he called, his voice booming through the cold morning. "I know you've got that drifter hiding in there. You're sitting on land that should be mine. Hand over the deeds and maybe I'll let you walk away." Eleanor stepped onto the porch, her posture straight, her rifle visible but lowered. "This land was never yours, Silas. Miriam bought it fair and legal. And you," her voice sharpened like a blade, "you murdered Robert Whitmore to get what little you have." A ripple went through the riders. Jonah saw one of the men glance uneasily at the others. Silas sneered. "You have no proof." "Actually," Jonah said, stepping into view, "we do." He held up a weathered metal box, recovered from the abandoned mine the night before. Inside were letters, deeds, and a dying man's confession. Miriam Whitmore's final weapon. Silas's face twisted. "You think a box of old paper will stop me?" "It already has," Jonah said. From behind the ridge came the sharp echo of a whistle. A moment later, 3 U.S. Marshals rode into the clearing, accompanied by a territorial judge and Owen Pike, the young rider who had betrayed Silas. The boy's face was pale, but his voice rang clear. "I told them everything," Owen said. "About Robert Whitmore, about the hired gun, about how you planned to kill these women." The lead marshal, a gray-bearded man with a badge that glinted in the sun, raised his voice. "Silas Kane, you're under arrest for conspiracy, land fraud, and the murder of Robert Whitmore." For a heartbeat, the valley seemed to freeze. Then one of Silas's riders dropped his gun. Another followed. The noose of justice Miriam Whitmore had crafted so many years ago was finally tightening. Silas, shaking with rage, drew his revolver. Jonah had expected it. He moved without thinking, shoving Eleanor behind the porch post as the gunshot cracked through the dawn. The bullet splintered the wooden beam beside his head. "Drop it, Silas," the marshal barked. But Silas didn't. He turned his fury on Jonah, snarling, "This ain't over." The second shot never came. Naomi, standing at the far corner of the porch, leveled her rifle with steady hands. The crack split the air, and Silas's revolver spun from his grip, clattering into the dirt. The fight left him like air from a punctured barrel. He stumbled, hands raised, as the marshals closed in with iron cuffs. As Silas Kane was dragged to the waiting wagon, Jonah felt 20 years of tension lift from the homestead. The 6 women stood together on the porch, their faces a mixture of relief and quiet triumph. Eleanor turned to Jonah. "It's done." He looked at the house, at the rising sun painting the valley in gold. He thought of the road he had walked. Empty towns, cold nights, the ache of loneliness that had followed him like a shadow. For the first time, he felt still. "You know," he said, voice low, "I think I finally found where I belong." The women smiled. Naomi's voice was soft but sure. "Welcome home, Jonah Mercer." The sun crested the hill, spilling light across the valley Miriam Whitmore had once envisioned. Justice had been served, and a new family, built not by blood, but by choice, was born on that quiet frontier morning. And so Jonah Mercer's long, lonely journey ended not with wealth, but with something far rarer, a home built on trust, loyalty, and second chances. 6 women, all survivors in their own right, chose to stand against greed and violence, proving that family isn't always who you're born to, but who chooses to stand beside you when the world turns its back. When we bring this story into our lives today, it reminds us of something timeless in American culture. Kindness to strangers can change the course of a life. Maybe it's holding the door for someone, offering a meal, or simply noticing the people society overlooks. Small acts of courage and compassion can ripple outward in ways we'll never fully see. But this ending leaves us with a question. If you were Jonah, would you have stayed and fought, or walked away to keep wandering? And in today's world, where neighbors are often strangers, what does finding a home truly mean? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Would you have trusted the 6 women? Do you believe in fate, or do we create our own family through choice and courage? Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched your heart, Please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need a reminder that second chances still exist. Because sometimes, even in a world that feels cold, a single open door can change everything.